Yeah, we were just actually talking before we started rolling about, you were saying you're a lefty, you play guitar left-handed, and
Yes.
we just walked through, we're touring right now, our opening act is the Jared James Nichols Band, and he's in the other room playing right now. He's a lefty, and so am I. And Jared and I were both sharing the exact same experience, which was that we started playing right-handed guitars because we just didn't know that there was such a thing as a left-handed guitar. Like, he said that his teacher just said, no, this, you play like this. And I think when I first started playing guitar was probably 1980 or 1981. So you can imagine there were a lot fewer left-handed guitars even back then, because
Right.
manufacturers nowadays realize that they're disadvantageous to at least make some left-handed guitars. Or back then, I mean, how many Les Pauls and Strats did you see that were left-handed from that era? So few.
Right.
And when I was growing up, there were only two major manufacturers, right? And you had Fender and Gibson, and then you had a few others,
Right.
and then they had this is just starting the import era. So you're just starting to get Ibanez, you had Area Pro 2, you would occasionally see some real off-brand stuff like Court and some, kind of really inexpensive Lerner guitars. My dad bought me my first guitar that I owned by myself. My first guitar, a friend of mine, he and I went in on it together. So we bought a
Nice.
guitar for 30 bucks at a pawn shop, and then we would alternate nights. So 15 bucks each, so we would, each of us could practice, and then we would get together and try to help each other learn. So it was kind of cool. And then eventually my dad said, okay, well, you're sticking with it. So he went to the same pawn shop, bought me my own guitar. It was a 1966 Fender Mustang, and for $35. And the neck was so warped that it literally looked like a Robin Hood shot arrows from it. So, which is good. I don't think everybody should start with a badass guitar. You should have to fight a little bit. Like, it makes you appreciate. It's like giving your, if you help buy a brand new car for your 16-year-old and it was like a super badass M5 BMW, it's like, where do we go from here? It's like,
Right.
let's start with an old Corolla and work up.
Well, actually, let's go there. What was your first car then? Was it a beater?
Oh yeah, a Honda Civic hatchback. It was my first, like, my parents let me drive their cars when I was a kid, but my first, like, when I no longer lived at home and I was on my own, it was a 82 Honda Civic hatchback, which is great because I could fit a full stack in the back.
Nice,
It was
right.
one of those high back hatchbacks, so you could slide two cabinets in, a head, and a guitar, and I could go and gig. And so people was like, why would you have a Carolina blue hatchback? I was like, well, it was $800. And secondly, you could fit all the gear you ever wanted. You pop the two seats, the back seats down, and you have room for days. And I still am that guy. I still want, I have an older Nissan Frontier pickup because I can
Okay.
put crap in the back. And it's one of those four-door trucks, so I could put a pedal board that I don't want exposed in the back, in the back of the,
Right.
obviously in the bed. Throw a couple of cabs, road cases and stuff. I always want to still, in my heart, I'm still that same kid. If my friends say, let's jam, I want to be able to throw my crap in the back of my gear and go.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked. And so, again, the conversation's leading us there. So let's talk about that. Like you said, around 1980, like when did you know, like rock and roll is not just my hobby, this is my life, this is what I'm going to do?
It was pretty much my life ever since I can remember. So even like late 70s, buying albums was it for me. Like I couldn't wait to buy this album, and and back then the big thing was compilation records. So K-Tel and a few other different manufacturers were putting out these amazing. So you'd get Boston and Kansas and Ted Nugent, ZZ Top, all in the same record. And you'd also get like 10cc, some kind of yacht rocky kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then you'd also get Elton John, a B side. So it was my version of Spotify, where you were like exposed to different styles of bands that maybe you didn't know. And then I guess it would have been around the time that I got my first guitar, I started buying magazines. You could get Cream magazine and Hit Parader and circus, and then I started becoming aware of what was going on in the LA scene. What were the big British metal bands that were coming over? I'm starting to read more and learn, but music has always been a part of it. I actually never considered music was going to be a career. Probably not until Stuck Mojo. I formed Stuck Mojo with 3 other guys in 1989. And it probably wasn't until 92 that I thought that there was a possibility this could be a career. Because even in 89, I was still working jobs and we were trying to get local shows. But, goals were just different. The goal was, God, we gotta play this club and we want to play with this band, but local bands. It wasn't like I want to open up for the Red Hot Chili Peppers when they come to town. It was like we want to open up for like the popular local original bands.
Sure.
And it was like this. Back then, the scene was amazing because this is pre-internet, so everybody is hand delivering flyers and standing outside the door of a concert when it ends out. You'd have 4 or 5 different competing bands handing flyers out to people as they come out of the Metallica show or whatever, Queensryche's in town or Def Leppard, and we're putting flyers on all the poles around town. And it really became this kind of community where you started to learn from other bands. How were they drawing? How were they earning a bigger audience? And it really did come down to networking, right? The same thing you do now, except for you just had to do it face to face. You couldn't send friend requests.
Right.
But and then we rehearsed every night. So Stuck Mojo, as a band, was rehearsing every night, not because we wanted to make it, but because we wanted to be the best band in Atlanta. So people always like saying, "You mean you never considered getting a record deal?" It's like we thought that was impossible, right? Like. The idea of making an album when you're a 20-year-old, I mean, maybe people think that when they're 20 years old now, maybe they are thinking in terms of, we're going to make it. But back then, it was just, we wanted to be the best little league team there was. We didn't think about going pro. You know what I mean? Like, we just want to be the most badass dudes from Atlanta. We want to own this local club scene, and we're going to kill it. And then we just started realizing we had a chance to open up for 311 in like 92 or 93, and then our audience exploded because we played in front of a couple of thousand people with that show. And we started meeting and networking other groups that were coming through town, and they were blown away by us. We started to get this thing of like, holy shit, maybe this can happen.
Right.
And it was great because you had this realization of like all those years of shagging fly balls in the backyard and throwing with dad. All of a sudden, maybe I could be a professional baseball player, the equivalent, But there was never a point in time in any of that music wasn't number one. Like playing guitar when I came home from school, I used to take my guitar to school every day. So during lunch, I would practice. I had band, I was in the marching band, so I would practice when I wasn't busy in that. So I was constantly playing. Even back then, when I would go on dates, I would bring my guitar to the movie theater, and I would wrap a bandana around the string so it was just dead, and I would just practice and work on legato licks and stuff. I was obsessed with it. And I also realized that, and Jericho hates it when I say this, but I really was not the best guitar player in my high school. And I was learning that physiologically, people are more predisposed to having different skills. Just like in baseball and football and basketball, people have different skill sets. And I was realizing quickly that I was never going to be a super fast guitar player. There were guys that had just started learning that were playing Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads licks, and I was so struggling with that stuff. I was a really good rhythm player, and that's where I was really excelling. And I could play some basic stuff. I found myself sticking more with learning kind of like Bryan Adams and the Cars and Duran Duran, because those guitar styles are more obtainable to me. Whereas playing a Dokken song, even though I could play the rhythm structures, I could never play like George. Like, his playing was from another planet compared to where I was. So I found myself really gravitating towards pop music that was rock, but had more simple lines on guitar. So by default, I didn't even realize it until later. I had to be able to kind of look back that my style was really being developed by melodic guys, because I was really struggling with the shred stuff. So I just trained myself differently, not out of a desire, but out of necessity. These are the people that I found more that I could play like. It was easier to play Mick Mars solos for me. So I was playing Motley Crue songs, and I was learning his licks because, you know, he was, to me, he was a working class guitar hero, right?
Yeah.
You know, whereas the other guys that I loved Malmsteen. I was obsessed with Malmsteen, but I didn't even try to play along with him. I just listened to him to be amazed, the same way you would go to see Cirque du Soleil, to be like,
Right.
wow. And I didn't want to get up there with those dudes because I knew I'd break my neck.
Right.
But listening to Yngwie was the same. Like, I love shred guys. And but I knew I was going to be a Rudolf Schenker before I was going to be a Matthias.
Yeah.
I always was, yeah.
Yeah, great names too. And I mean, nobody gives a shit about this, but for me, I came from the same place. I was like, I cannot get those high speeds that these guys can do. But, you know, I can play Hendrix, and I can
Yes.
try to get there. What about the metal guys who played a little bit, I don't know, with more, not lightning fast, like Hetfield, I think, is one of the great
Hetfield is one of the greatest unsung heroes of, like, people
Right.
always cite his right hand for his rhythm playing, but I really think he is my favorite lead player in Metallica. His solos are great. They're composed perfectly. They're played perfectly. I mean, I love Tom Schultz. I mean, I'm a big Boston fan. You know, I love AC/DC. But even AC/DC, I mean, Angus is deceptively, you listen to it and you think that his playing is simple, but it's deceptively difficult. His phrasing's unique. The way he plays is great. His hand strength is amazing. So his vibrato, just the way his approach is incredible. And so I would take bits and pieces of what was obtainable. Like you, I loved Hendrix. For me, I could wrap my head around what he was doing. I could wrap my head around Stevie Ray Vaughan. I could wrap my head around,
Right.
but I still loved, I mean, Van Halen was probably one of my favorite bands. I also loved Journey. I was never going to be able to, I could play the melodic passages that Neil Schon did, but I could never, when Neil goes into that one blazing lick that he does, you know, he does this little lick, he reels you in with that little melodic love stuff, and you're like, oh man, it's so good. And then he hits that lick and that Dorian mode or whatever, the Nickelodeon mode that just freaking blows my mind.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think Rudolf Schenker, I know he didn't play any lead stuff other than kind of some of the harmony melodic leads that they were on some of his earlier records. To me, his tone, the way he played, his energy on stage, I'll say this, I've had a lot of offers to play for big bands over the years, like big bands, and that's because they see me being me in my environment, playing my songs. So, and I have, and I think the reason why I have created a really interesting niche in the music business is because, like short basketball players or whatever, you create a style based on your weaknesses. So I'm hiding my weaknesses and I'm playing to my strengths. My strengths are, I feel like I can really connect and tell stories with guitars. I'm a good melodic player, and I play angry. So I think because Yngwie, Eddie, there was these guys that I really loved, Stevie Ray Vaughan, they played angry, and I love that angry style. Even Neil Schon, when he's playing beautiful, there's some anger to his playing. There's something about it that has an aggressiveness. So I was always attracted to that, and that, I think, that is kind of a tool in my kind of arsenal of my approach. And so going back, I would have to tell these guys, it's like, I am so flattered that you would even think that I could do this gig, but you have overestimated who I am. The same way that over the years we've auditioned guitar players to come play for Fozzy, who were amazing players, but I couldn't give them the gig because their feel was not there. They were a little too stiff. They didn't understand how to play on their heels and to play in the pocket. They didn't understand how to swing. They don't know how to play in triplet modes. They're like, there's a lot of things that I am really good at, but that's because I've developed that real, as Liam Neeson says, a specific set of skills. And then there's other things that I've never tried to develop, like down picking. I'm a terrible down picker. I'm an alternate picker, just like Dimebag. I alternate pick everything.
Sure.
And some of those bands that have asked me to play are these crazy fast right hand down picking things. I could never play in Anthrax. I could never play in Testament or those early Metallica stuff. It's like, no way. Because that style is so foreign to where my comfort zone is. And the other place I really excel is in my ability to basically emulate Cirque du Soleil acrobat on stage while still playing clean and tight. And I've developed that over years and years of learning how to anchor the guitar against my body, learning how to use my pinky on the bottom side of the pickup ring to control the guitar while still being able to play aggressively, tight, staying in the pocket, and learning how to surround myself with musicians that make me sound better, like a team. I don't care who's good. I just care about who I play good with, right? That's it. Chemistry, what a concept, right? All these super groups stink. They don't play good together. Like, it's like, you go listen to the first Foreigner record. It's like, tell me the name of the rhythm guitar player in the first Foreigner record. You can't. Yeah, nobody cares. Yeah. Like, it's the same thing as like, what was the name of the bass player for Boston? I know. Yeah. It's the thing is like, and you're talking about some of the greatest rhythm sections of all time that made these magical, and we always gravitated towards Brad Delp's voice on Boston and Tom Schultz's genius with sound, but you had this amazing band, and that chemistry is what made them be able to shine. I always tell people that it's like, you notice, there's these frontmen in history. Let's call it Phil Anselmo, and let's say David Lee Roth. Okay, two of the greatest in separate genres, but two of the greatest of all times. I would make the argument, if not for the amazing band they stood in front of, we may not have ever heard of them. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like having those dudes, and part of Dimebag's sound was Rex's bass sound. It's this thing that I try to explain to people all the time. It doesn't matter what your guitar sounds like in the music store. What does it sound like on the deck with the drummer and the bass player? What does it sound like in the mix? Because a good JCM 800, when you play through it, or name an old Laney or an old Mesa Boogie Mark II, you play that thing, it doesn't sound great in the music store. It lacks a little bit of gain, lacks a little bit of saturation, that kind of creaminess that we all gravitate towards. It feels like training wheels, like, whoa, this sounds good. Right. And you put that amp on the deck next to an old JMP, a Plexi, like I said, a Mark II, a Mark III, Mesa Boogie, and they will eat your lunch all day long. And it's one of those things that I think when you listen to Back in Black, if someone said, listen to that guitar sound, you would like isolate it. I don't think people would go nuts over it. Like Malcolm Young's guitar sound, if you walked into a music store and saw an old guy playing through that amp, I don't think you'd go, damn, that guy's tone. In the context of that band, in those songs played the way they are, it's the greatest guitar sound of all time.
Right.
And that's, I think for me, that's where I have excelled, is those types of awareness. Like I've got great tone. I've surrounded myself with great players who I play well with. I write songs that I can play well. I don't try to write outside. I don't draw outside the lines. Sure. And I've built a good career of myself being kind of this Jedi. These aren't the droids you're looking for, but these are. And that's my story of doing this for 30 years.
That's great, man. And you know what? I got to say, I want to just keep geeking out about guitar. That's what I want to do. But I'll bring it back in a little bit because there's a whole other dynamic. And it's funny that you just said this. You just kind of are very modest and cool about it, which I think is impressive. But you're modest about your own ability, but yet you're an adrenaline mob. With like the best of the best. You got Russell Allen and Portnoy. That's you're in this top tier team. Like you're saying, like I'm pretty good, I'm all right, but you're in the A leagues there. So that I was trying to get in there not just to pay you a compliment, but
Thanks,
how did that experience work out?
It was amazing. It was great.
It sounds great. That songs are. It's just such a great sound. You guys really gelled.
Thanks.
So.
I really loved that band. if I felt like it was going to last, I would have stayed. I was the first guy out.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason I was is because everybody in the band had this feeling that this was the style of music they should play and that they wanted to play. But I was trying to respectfully say, this is not the style of music that you guys really do. Like, Russell Allen to me is one of, if not the best, one of the greatest voices of our generation. Jeff Scott Soto, Yorn, Russell Allen, there's a few guys, right, who anything they sing like makes me weepy. Like, just and to me, Russell is at his best when he's singing like late 70s Kansas style. Just that beautiful bluesy, got grit in his voice. He can tell a story. I believe every word he's saying. Like, he's magic. His voice is beautiful, and yet it has a quality that has a hauntingness to it. It's powerful. He can sing Dio. He has all these things. Yeah. And in Adrenaline Mob, he's doing stuff that could have easily been on a Black Label Society record or a Disturbed album or something. He's kind of more grunty, barky thing. It was like, why? I didn't, like, dude, you realize you have one of the most amazing voices of all time, a style that is so unique. That's how you should sing. But how do you tell Russell Allen and his own band, I'm the last guy in, they already are established group of guys, 4 dudes, and they're looking for a rhythm guitar player. How do you tell them, and how do you say to Portnoy, who's arguably one of the most talented drummers of all time, don't play like Tommy Lee, play like you. Like, sure. I think there was this idea in Adrenaline Mob that they were going to be this radio band. And I was much more trying to say, we should either look really forward or look way back, go super retro. I kept kind of saying it respectfully. Why don't we look at doing something 70s, or Cream, something really interesting and heavy, Sabbathy, but melodically. I mean, there's so much stuff. Instead of kind of doing this 2010 octane heavy rock kind of thing that they were doing. Yeah, it was groovy and they were showing off some musicianship, and then also there were so many guys in the band who had so much success on their own. Russell obviously with Symphony X, Portnoy and Dream Theater, me with Stuck Mojo and Fozzy, Paul DeLeo, the bass player, had so many credits, whether it's Joe and Turner played for Ace Frehley, playing for Nina, in the huge pop star in Germany. We all had all this experience. And the guy who kind of started the whole band is Mike Orlando, and he's the guy who had kind of done not really anything other than be one of the most amazing guitar players you've ever seen. I mean, he really is. Like, I looked at his hands, and it's almost like it's CGI. I don't understand. I couldn't look at it without thinking it was like a trick. You know what I mean? Like, his hand is so fast. He plays so amazingly quick and tasty. He's a 1 in a million guitar player. He really is. And so I had a good spot in that band, in that I was the Rudolph Schenker. I was the Hetfield. I had a great, perfectly designed spot for me in that band. And if I felt like it was going to be successful, I would have stayed. But I just felt like the guys were attempting to do a style of music that wasn't steering into our sweet spot as a band, and at the same time, too many chiefs, too many people with a lot of experience who thinks they know the best, and it really was. It was never going to work because there weren't enough betas in that group. You know what I mean? There were too many people who thought they knew the right answer.
It was a super group for sure.
Yeah, and it was one of those things that part of me thinks I could have tried to be a little more assertive, but who am I to say what's right and wrong? Even that's arrogant to say. I know what's right for them. I don't know. Like, I had an opinion, but I don't know if it was the right one. I still would have loved to have seen, I would have loved to have seen Adrenaline Mob do a hard rock record that was way more akin to something Sabbath meets Zeppelin meets Kansas, meets a little bit of proggy musicianship. And I think what Mike's doing now with the Sons of Apollo is bang on. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where he should be, because he's telling stories that very other few drummers can tell. Whereas in Adrenaline Mob, he was telling stories that everyone was telling. Like, he's playing very similar to a lot of other guys. This kind of groove style, rock, 4/4, which is very difficult to do well. But there were so many unique individuals in that group. I would have loved to have seen it do something else. But
Yeah.
two members in the band got in a fist fight on the third show, and I was like, okay, so we're fighting on day 3. We can't make it to the second week. and Mike wants to do 8 covers in the set, and the originals sound like 7 Dust B-side songs. Like, I was like, I just felt like, man, I don't know this is gonna last. And they were mad at me when I left. They were like, I got kind of a snippy, messages from the fellows kind of individually. And then later, when Mike Portnoy left, he sent me a message. He's like, yeah, well, you saw it first. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But I still love those guys. And part of me still wishes that I played with them. Just with the excitement. Playing in front of Mike Portnoy and looking behind me and just seeing him throw vocabulary at me. Like, I'm not a great improviser. Like, I want to know the song. I want to know all my parts. I want to have it memorized. Like, if I'm doing a Shakespearean play, I'm not improvising Shakespeare. I know my lines because I want to know where I am at all moments. I want to hit all my marks. I want to bang them with aggressiveness. I want to hit everything with super sharpness. Playing with Mike, he never plays it the same way twice. So I'm literally on a Bronco ride, like having to pay attention. I'm looking over my shoulder at all times going, and it was so frightening, but at the same time exciting to be, and then listening to Russell sing every night. Even when he's having a rough night, he's in the top, 1% of everybody on the planet.
Yeah.
I mean, he was my favorite singer before I joined the band. That's why when they called me and, said, hey man, we'd love for you to do this band. You don't even need to audition. You're perfect. We know you're the guy. And they told me Russell's a singer. I was like, freaking, I'm in. Like, it could have been any rest of the guys. To stand next to Russell Allen and hear him sing every night was magic.
Like I said, I'm not putting you on the spot. This is not like crack journalism. So like about 10 years ago, I remember I saw an interview with you where you said something like, Fozzy's on the side and Stuck Mojo is my number one. Does that hold true today, or where are we with that kind of?
Well, you always are playing the cards you're dealt, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just life.
Yes.
And like, for anyone to be so rigid and that they're not willing to be pliable, especially in a creative endeavor like we're in here that involves multiple personalities and a business apparatus you can't control. I mean, let's be honest. There's no musician in the world who, it doesn't even matter if you're in the top elite, you still can't control the business.
Right.
You can try your best to steer the ship, but the waters are the variable that you just are having to fight the entire time. And so I always wanted, part of me always wanted Stuck Mojo to be my number one, and part of that was just because it was a no compromise situation for me. It was my baby. Mm-hmm. I was able to drive the lyrical content. I was able to drive the musical content. And it was exciting for me as well because lyrically we were doing things that were taboo subjects. Especially in 2019, you can't say anything that we have right. It's off limits.
Right.
And I love that because I think rock and roll is supposed to be dangerous. I think it's supposed to be counterculture. I think it's supposed to say and push limits and stuff. And Fozzy's not that way. We decided early on Fozzy wouldn't deal with political and social topics, and we shouldn't. Like, it's not that kind of band. Jericho doesn't have an interest in geopolitical events. Like, so we shouldn't sing about it, right? Otherwise, we're performing and not being real, conveying ideas that are special to us. So the excitement of Stuck Mojo was different. The problem is that I can never keep the wheels on the car on that band. The longtime frontman of that band is a very talented personality, but he has always had the same struggles. It's just as I got older, I had a lower tolerance of those struggles. And it took me a long time to figure that out because I always wondered, people were like, well, it worked back in the 90s. Why? I don't understand. Well, yeah, I was a kid.
Right. No, you should be the same.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Don't change.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when I'm like 25 years old, my threshold of tolerance for pain was in a different spot. So chaos and turmoil and all of that stuff are things that I was willing to just live in. Mm-hmm. But it also made me a dark dude too. I mean, I was in fights and just living that chaos. And it's like, I don't want it anymore. Like, we took a break for a while from Stuck Mojo because the personalities were just at a point where it was intolerable. Like, we were fist fighting in the band. Like, internally, there was just so, and I felt like, man, I've got a little momentum in my name. I had met Jericho. We were recording a Fozzy record, and the first Fozzy record was very much a Steel Panther blueprint, fake names. You know, the concept was fun rock and roll, costumes, and that was in 2000, so it predated the Steel Panther kind of blueprint as well. So we were excited about that. But I was going to try to parlay the momentum of Stuck Mojo and the momentum coming off this first Fozzy record into basically a solo album, and which I tried a million times. And I have a good voice, but I don't have an amazing voice. And I kept trying to find singers that I could work with that could front this new kind of solo thing, like basically what Yngwie or any George Lynch, you know, when you do your solo stuff, you're trying to find who's the guy who can stand up front for me. And can they carry the load up front, especially after I'm in a band with two prolific frontmen, and Jericho's one of the greatest guys who ever stood in the front of a stage. And then you've got Bones, who from Stuck Mojo was such a prolific frontman. And I was always being compared to those two, so I was never finding the guy. I could find the voice, but I couldn't find the guy. And over time, I've tried and tried and tried to make Stuck Mojo a band that could compete for my number one spot. I just can't, you know? And so Fozzy is probably as good, if not a better band than Stuck Mojo, because it shares a lot of the same members. The reason that I always had this attraction to Stuck Mojo over Fozzy over certain periods of time, not all, it wasn't consistent, but there were these periods where I had more, like I said, was the danger element that was amazing. I also, there's something special about being a four-piece band because you play differently. When you have two guitar players, it requires much more discipline because two guys playing rhythm together in a four-piece, you can have these moments of looseness where you can just go crazy, and you know, you don't have to worry about the context of the, like Dave Murray and Adrian Smith can't veer off the road. Right. Those dudes, they have to be locked in. Anytime it's that way, it's two guys, you know, it's because Fozzy was never designed as rhythm and shredder. You know, the shred guy who's just going nuts, and then the rhythm guy's holding down the meats. Like Fozzy is just like Priest and Maiden. It was designed as a two guitar band.
Gotcha.
But I tell you what, man, being on stage with Chris, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, when Chris has decided to dedicate more of his time to music, because during those periods of time when I want to say I want Stuck Mojo to be my number one, that's because Chris is a full-time wrestler. Where in my life am I going to expect a guy who is in the elite of all elite in his field?
Right.
You know, like he's always mentioned in the top 5 of all time. I mean, people talk to him in terms of Flair and Hogan, and I mean, he's in those conversations. So I never think for a minute that I can count on Fozzy being my number one, because this dude has got the most popular podcast on Apple. he's an author. Right. He's like, so in my mind, I gotta be careful not to hitch all of my hopes and dreams to Fozzy, because I have this prolific entrepreneur. He loves rock and roll, right? But he also has all these other things he's doing. He's in movies. He's doing all this stuff.
Right.
So it made more sense for me to always feel like I'm focusing my energy on, at least my priorities on Stuck Mojo, because that's the thing I can control. But Chris has put almost almost more energy in the band than he has in wrestling over the last 3 or 4 years, especially with the success of Judas having 3 top 10 singles, and us opening for Iron Maiden, and us going to Australia playing with Metallica, playing on these big festivals, opening for Aerosmith, and like seeing us being mentioned in the same. I mean, the new single "Nowhere to Run" just went top 40. All of a sudden, we're in the game. You know what I mean? Before we were a fringe player, now we're in the game, and I think that has allowed me to stop thinking of Fozzy as my number 2, because it's never been because I like one band more than the other, or it's always down to you drive the car that's in the driveway. And when my frontman in Fozzy is making a movie and being the top guy in the world in wrestling, I can't. There's no car there. You know what I mean? So you do what all musicians do, which is that you just work, right? And you focus in on what you can control, which is make a solo record, work on this material, collaborate with other bands, do what I can over the last few years. But with Chris's desire to really push this thing, it's made it easy.
I hope you can get him to come out of his shell, though. I know he's really shy.
Yeah, he's super shy guy, yeah.
But actually, I do want to say thank you for taking that in the right spirit. Because I realized after I said it, I was like, boy, that came across wrong. It sounded I would point out to anyone who's tuned into this that, that was also, I think when you said that, Fozzy was still kind of transitioning from being, kind of a fun cover band, like you compared to Steel Panther, into being a band of primarily originals and that kind of thing. So
it was, and Fozzy's just been this crazy ride in that I don't know that anyone had long-term vision. Maybe Chris did, but because he really has always had long-term vision on stuff, whereas I'm always just staring at the yellow lines in front of me on the road, like wanted to go real fast. You know what I mean? Like, so my goal was keep the car on the road and keep the quality of what you're doing. Like Yoda said, pay attention to where you are, like be mindful of your environment. And that's what I've always tried to do, is to excel by being very careful on the product that we put on the stage, the product that we put on albums. And Chris is just the most amazing entertainer. So he and I are great partners for each other because he sees the road differently than I do. And he's always looking at things in terms of showbiz. I mean, his guys are David Lee Roth and Paul Stanley and, Freddie Mercury and David Bowie. He's looking at these guys who were kings of fashion and culture. Like, I could care less. Like, none of that stuff means anything to me. It was Freddie's voice. It was the songs. It was him partnering with Brian May, singing on that guitar and that magic tone that Brian had. That was my connection. I never cared about being a star. I don't wear nice clothes on the airplane. Like, I'm always dressed for comfort. I'm you know what I mean? I came from a completely different background and perspective than Chris did. He was brought up in showbiz. I'm on TV. I mean, dude, he performs in front of 7 million people on TV on a weekly basis. And so his perspective has to be so much more different than I. And that's why we are the best partners, because we really do complement each other. My skill set is the opposite of his and vice versa. And I think that is why we've really started to succeed recently. And we've finally, for the last record, we brought in a number 3 guy. We brought in Johnny Andrews, who is our new producer, who's doing the current record we're working on and the Judas album. And he is unlike either one of us. He has a completely different perspective on songwriting and producing. And we have created this great, teepee, like all these legs. It was before just this structure of the two of Jericho and I and this amazing band that we've got supporting us and our ideas. And now we've got Johnny on board, who is very involved in the writing and and in everything. I mean, he really is. And part of it is that we saw the success that bands like AC/DC really benefited from Mutt Lange and Roy Thomas Baker to Cheap Trick and to Queen and Andy Johns and these great people who when you hear their albums without them, it's a different album. Like these producers, Bob Rock is another guy. I mean, And I know people always cite Metallica, but there's so many records that Bob Rock made. That first Blue Murder record, still one of my favorite albums of all time.
Yeah.
And what he did with those three guys, you could just hear his thumbprint all over it. And we were looking for that guy. We needed our guy, and it also made things easier for Chris, because if we, as being two guys who were having to make decisions, there was no tiebreaker. It was just who's going to win the argument.
Right.
And now we've got a producer who Chris and I have determined and made this kind of pact between us. If what he says goes.
Right.
Keeps us from fighting. It allows us to default to the producer, and that's the producer's jobs anyway. He's your coach.
Right.
He's the guy who sits on the sideline and is watching the play, and he gets to say, here's how we can do this better. And I know you think you know, but I'm watching from the sideline, and here's what we're going to do. I can see your strengths, and here's where we're going to really accentuate those strengths. And yeah, so it's really been great, and it's become more fun to be in Fozzy because of Chris and I's dynamic has gotten better. We used to fight a lot, and that was just because there was two of us. Now we've got Johnny, so it allows both of us to not feel like we have to be right. We can work within this new structure, and we've brought our manager Mark Willis, who started managing Stuck Mojo in '92 and has been there the entire time, my entire career.
Wow. All
19 albums. This is the 20th album I'm putting out with Fozzy this year or next year. And we brought him into no longer just a manager, but he's part of the process now. So there's 4 dudes that are part of this decision making, and it's really helped. It's made us all feel like I book the flights. It's not like we call a manager now. The manager's part of the team. Okay. So we're all got a paddle in the water, and we're all participating in this team that we're all working for. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and where Chris is the strongest is where he's working. Same for our manager, same for Johnny, same for me. And we've got a great team, and it's made it more fun, and it's made me, as much as I would love to do another Stuck Mojo record right now, and I had kind of some songs set aside, and I'm really happy with Robbie J, the guy that I worked with on this most recent record, vocally. It's just things are going so right, and the chemistry's there, and it's fun. Like, we're playing well together. It would be short-sighted and foolish for me to get off this and divert my energies to something else at this point. You know, I'm in the fastest car that I've ever been in. Let's go win the Daytona 500. Let's do this, you know? And that's kind of my mentality.
Yeah. All right, man. You know what? This is Rich Ward. He's the Duke. It's been a great conversation. Like I said, I want to keep going, but also, like, I've taken plenty of your time, man.
Let's go. You have another question?
All right, well, I'll get one more then.
Yeah, let's do it.
Only one more. So really, my main question I always ask of people who are this busy, how do you keep it all spinning? How do you manage, you know, all this stuff, like you're on the road this much? How do you just manage, you know, having life at home and hearing yourself think? How do you kind of keep it all together? How do you keep the balance?
I don't have any friends. And what I mean by that is I have friends, but I don't have a social circle. I have people that I talk to on the phone, but I don't go to lunch with my buddies. I don't play golf. I don't go to sporting events. I don't have hobbies. I don't do things. I go to the gym every morning, and not for vanity purposes, but I go because I want to stay healthy and I want to be able to put on the best performance I can on stage. Right. And anybody who's ever put a 12-pound piece of mahogany around their neck and performed for an hour and a half, it takes some physical stamina, and that requires exercise. So that's has to be a priority. I practice every day, so even if that means not a metronome or writing, maybe that's just me sitting with my wife on the TV and running scales while we watch Breaking Bad or something. Like, there's a guitar in my hand for dexterity purposes every day. I may not be getting better, but it's maintenance. So there's some playing that we all players know where we're trying to get better, we're educating ourselves, we're working on pushing ourselves, and then there's maintenance. So I would say probably 75% of my practice is maintenance at this point as a 50-year-old dude, because I never want to be like some of these guys who don't practice anymore, and you see them all the time. I go see them, I'm like, that guy hasn't played guitar in 6 months. Like, it's terrible.
Name some names. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sound it rhymes with face, really. And I don't want to be that guy. And listen, like half the guys my age who are playing, we have tendonitis. I mean, you ask anybody who's in their 50s and they're struggling with some hand strength issues, they're struggling because that's just it's the way. It doesn't matter what you do in life. If you're a tennis player, you're a golfer, whatever it is, you do repetitive exercise, and eventually you're going to create damage just from repeated things. And I know George Lynch has talked about he's suffering from some of that stuff. And you got guys like Eric Clapton. Most of it's not arthritis. Most of it's tendonitis, which is just wearing that shit out from just doing it all the time. So I have some of that as well. And I've tried to figure out workarounds for it. I broke my pinky about 5 years ago, and it never quite got right again. There are some certain patterns that I can't quite play properly. So I've started using 1, 2, 3 and a 1, 3, 4 pattern. So I use the little stretch instead of using index, ring, pinky on a 1, 3, 4. Now I'm stretching 1, 3, 4, and I'm not using my pinky as much anymore. And I know there's tons of guys like Hendricks or Gary Moore who didn't use a lot of pinky. You know, I know, but I had built my entire style around having a strong pinky, which I don't anymore. So there are things that I used to be able to do that I can't do as well. So I do workarounds, and I'm kind of repeating old solos. And I can only really play like hard playing, like really strength building exercises for about an hour a day. Then I have to take a break, and then I can play another session after same thing as like running or anything. If you got knee issues, you know how that is. You run for 40 minutes and then you're like, my knee's hurting, so I stop, do some type of other exercise later in the day if you feel like you need to get a second one in. I'm married. I don't have kids. I had to make that decision. I want to be an aging musician who spends his time with his kids at the ball field, and that his entire focus is on being a good dad, because I grew up with a dad who had a million things going on and was never there. So I had to decide, God, that is still part of me. Like anyone who was kind of raised single momish, there's always that part of all dudes who kind of have that little thing in the back of their head that we don't resent dad, but we don't want to try to repeat the quote unquote sins of the father, or whatever that cliche is. I made that decision that I wasn't going to have kids, and I made the decision that I wasn't going to go on family reunions and trips and beach vacations, and I was just going to be a full-time I was going to be Rich Ward, the Duke of Metal, and it was never going to be a part-time job. So I had to find a lady who was just going to be okay with that. And on our first date, I basically laid it all out on the table, and I said, you don't want to date me. You don't. On our first date, it's like, you're asking for just a life of just misery and poverty and heartache. This is terrible. And I laid it out in a humorous enough way that she was like, I can't believe you're like laying this out. And I was like, well, this should be a job interview. On a first date, you need to ask all these questions, because you don't have permission to ever make me feel bad for being on tour. It's hard enough being on tour and being away from someone you love without them saying, I wish you'd come home, this is bullshit. You can't do it. It'll ruin it, because then you start having animosity towards each other. You just have to this is just it. Being a musician is a way less honorable scenario than being in the military, but a military wife has to understand. Or a military dad whose wife is in the Navy, or if she's in the Marines. If someone's going to be away, it has to be a guilt-free understanding going into it. This is what I accept. And I have some friends that I really love, and they call me all the time, and they're like, hey, you want to go to lunch today? No, I can't. And I know at some point they must think this guy's such a dick. He never does anything. Because I either want to be working on improving me for my band, i.e. exercise, writing, playing, or I want to give my free time to my wife, who is patient. The other time, it's not that she requires it, has asked it of me, but if I expect to have a healthy relationship, I don't want to give it to the fellas to go to the sports bar and hang with them when I just spent the last 8 months out on the road. That's not the building blocks of a healthy relationship, is if you are playing golf, on Sunday when you have a day off. You spend it with your lady. you know, unless having a healthy relationship is not a priority for you.
Right.
So
I respect all that.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy, and I hate it because there's part of me that hates that I never see my family, and I could make that decision to do that. I've just decided that that's got to be second for me. I'm not going to go to the beach with my dad for a week and just sit there because it would drive me nuts. It's
Sure.
it's like I love my dad, but I want to go visit him for a day or two, and then I got to get back to work because there's some 25-year-old badass guitar player who's writing killer riffs and who wants my spot, and I want to fight him for my spot. You know, like, to me, being in a band is a combat sport, and when I mean it's a friendly combat, like, I want to pick that 25-year-old guitar player up and help get his band out there, and at the same time, he wants to be where I am, and I want to help him get there, but I want to protect my turf by being the best version of me that I can be. I always think that's why sports is really helpful for kids. Like, competition's a good thing. Like, it's always good. I want to be the first baseman, but you're not good enough. Get in left field. Like, you know, get better, work at it. You know, like, if you want it, you can have it. That's the great thing about meritocracies. Is like, you know, take nepotism out of it. Meritocracy is the greatest thing. If you guitar players, the best guitar players, the best athletes, you know, the best politicians, they rise to the top through hard work and talent, somewhere in the middle, a little bit of luck, a little bit of chance, but somewhere in there. And then the other part is that I've established a fan base over a number of years, and they pay money to come see me. The last thing I want them to do is to see a version of Rich Ward that was less than the one they saw last time. I don't like. That would be heartbreaking. Like, if I don't ever want to be like, think of that conversation on the way home in the car. Yeah, Fozzy's pretty good. What's going on with Rich, man? I don't think like he had a good gig.
Yeah.
He's looking like, you know, like, I never want that. Like, I always want them to walk away going, damn, dude is crushing it. Like, you know, and part of that is just the pride in the job that you do. You know, the baker still wants to make the same quality cakes that he made when he built his bakery 20 years ago, and I still want to do that. And then the other part of it is just self-preservation. You get lazy, that 25-year-old kid's kicking your ass right out of there.
Right. All right, man, that was great. It was very well said. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the talk. Everyone should keep their ears to the ground for the Fozzy record. Do you have a tentative date for the record?
I think we're probably looking at springtime. Could
Okay.
be as early as March, could be as or late as maybe 1st of May. It all comes down to, you know, the fact that we're now signed to Sony means that there's such a larger organization that is required. It's no longer a boat, it's a fleet of ships that must turn. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of coordination. So it's not just up to us to like, hey, our record's done and put it out. It doesn't work that way anymore. That was the beautiful thing about Century Media, is that, like, when we were signed to them, there was more flexibility. There was less titles coming out every year. We were able to kind of organize a schedule that both parties could kind of come to and agree on. But now with Sony, there's so many things they have to consider that some of it's out of our hands, that we're just going to make the best record we can. And I think it's, again, every band always says the same exact thing. It's going to be our best record. And then they always say, I know all bands say this, but this is going to be our best record. Like, so I don't know what best even means. I don't know, like, everyone watches Star Wars through a different prism. Like, I fought, you know, with everyone who wants to tell me what Star Wars movie is the best, because we all see them differently, right?
Right.
So there's going to be plenty of people who won't like the new Fozzy record just because they thought, you know, the last one was better because that one spoke to them. There was a lyric on that album that connected with them, or there was something about the production that connected with them. It's like we all do that. If it's just art is subjective, but we have gotten better as a band. That's the beautiful thing about us now having a pretty full-time frontman who's very engaged in being involved in the day-to-day of Fozzy. Not that he wasn't ever before, but now that he's had a lot more time off from wrestling, and he's really wanting this to be a huge band, not in terms of I want to sell platinum albums, but it be as big and as good as it can possibly be. So now the team is really working well together. Our chemistry with our producer is amazing. So I think we are going to make an amazing album based on the fact that the chemistry is right. Like, we have the formula right. You know, it's been perfected over years of trying this and trying that, and now we are really putting the best, putting the best team on the field now. I hate kind of using 10,000 weird cliches, but we really are. We're putting the best team on the field now, and camaraderie's good. It's always good when guys are getting along. Like, healthy tension based on creative differences is not unhealthy. There are plenty of bands who dislike each other, and making records when you dislike each other is hard because it takes the joy out of the process. And that's always going to be a difficult place when you get into a room of people that you're giving the stink eye to on day one. It's hard. Right. So we have a lot of things going for us, and that great label, a track record now with a bunch of singles who have cracked into the Billboard charts. So once that door is kicked down, it's easier for you to have follow-up that do well. Right. And we're writing well, and we figured out our formula. It's great. So I'm hoping for a really big 2020. I really am. And if it just sells as well as Judas and no better, it'll still be a huge success for us because our last record exceeded all expectations, and we're just going to try to stay on pace.